Hi everyone, I'm JP, and this video is the third in a series in which I chronicle my first solo independent game development project. So it's been a few weeks since I've done one of these, and I'm shooting off the webcam this time because I don't have a lot of on-screen progress actually. I've certainly been writing some code and I've added a few things to the game, but it's nothing that I really necessarily want to show right now. And that always makes me a little nervous, because it's always really satisfying to be able to show somebody something that has gone into the game. Look, I added this new item that you can interact with, or I added this new thing that the player can do, or I added a bunch of cool looking new art. And I don't always have that. I won't always have that to show, but it's still a little nerve-wracking every day where I don't check something into my source control depot, some new code or assets or something. I'm always a little, But I think at this stage in the project, there's still some important conceptual work that I need to be doing. I spent some 2 weeks ago. I was out of town for a bit and I visited with my family and I got to see my sister perform, and that was really cool. And I worked on bug fixing for a while. There were some bugs and just crashes and things like that in Playscii, my tool engine art animation system, that were just bothering me as I was trying to just do normal work on the game. And so I fixed those and ironed them out. I also got the latest release of Playscii 0.6.0 out, and you can get that on itch.io or Bitbucket. And so you can try that out. A lot of that stuff is in game. A lot of the improvements there are in game mode, so you might not notice it necessarily unless you're very intrepid in digging into the game creation stuff. So yeah, but in that that creative exploration, conceptual sort of stuff. This one is probably going to be a bit more touchy feely, which is why I went to the full screen cam on this. So yeah, one conclusion that I've come to is that up till now, and for good reason, I think I've been pretty deductive and very analytical in my process for how I've been building the game. The stuff that I added to the game just to establish that base of having a player character who can walk around and pick stuff up and throw stuff. Those are very core interactions that I know I'm going to need and I know are important. But from there, once you have that sort of most basic bit of mechanics or something, the creative possibilities open up significantly. And even though I have a clear idea in my head of what the game's story and setting is and what the core mechanics are, there's still a lot of blanks to fill in, And so I've already got, a few big ideas in the game, or just in the game conceptually, still to be implemented. But I think there's still a few blanks missing, and I think they're more of a connective nature. Sometimes you have an idea that isn't really creating a ton of work in and of itself, but it helps you understand what one thing in the game, maybe a story element, how that connects with something on the mechanical side, for instance. And those ideas are pretty valuable, really. Lee Petty, the art director at Double Fine, who I worked with when I was there, has sort of a similar concept called filter ideas. And the example he gave was from stacking. In stacking, the overall concept of the game is everybody's all the characters are stacking dolls, and they have different abilities, and you as the player can use those different abilities to solve puzzles. But there's also, he called it a filter sort of idea, which would be something I think I'm getting this right. If not, he's given GDC talks on some of this stuff. There's things in stacking. The stacking dolls live in a toy world where it's decorated with human scale, kind of dollhouse scale objects like a matchbox and a spool of thread and a shoe and stuff like that. And then also sort of supporting that is there's a tilt shift camera focus sort of thing that makes everything feel tiny, like it's a stop motion set, or just that you're at a different scale than a normal human walking around. And that idea is useful because it's not really prescribing or preventing you. It's not really shutting down any existing ideas, but it's helping you fill in blanks. as soon as you tell somebody, as soon as you explain that to people, it's like, oh, well, if I'm an environment artist and I'm going to decorate a room in stacking, then I know that I can, I can kind of use my imagination, but I have a very concrete reference point where I can just say, oh, well, let's see, I'm going to decorate this room. Well, it's a kitchen, so maybe I can like take some kitchen implements and sort of like turn a balloon whisk into something, or and you get these fun, just very spontaneous kind of ideas that emerge from that. I think just a larger quality of ideas is that they can be prescriptive, i.e. they can tell you when something isn't a good idea, and those are useful sometimes because they end up those can be constraints, and a lot of times constraints are useful. They help you, they give you limits to your thinking that keep you from running out of control. And then other times ideas are generative, like you have this one idea that a whole bunch of other ideas can kind of tumble out of. You're like, oh, well, now that you've told me that, like I can think of like a dozen other ideas. And on a bigger budget project, sometimes those are very valuable to give to a design team, for instance, because then all of your designers can go out and add a bunch of new stuff to the game, and they're helping build that unifying, connective idea up instead of fragmenting the direction and making it kind of more of a jumbled mess. So in the context of my project, I'm just one person, and I'm thinking of this in terms of like, oh my gosh, this game already feels like it's at the limits of my ability. It's already got kind of a substantial mechanics concept. It's not like experimental. It's not like, taking this big flying leap into the unknown, but it's not a one idea game, as I've called it sometimes. Like there are some artists, there are some game creators that I really respect, like Stephen Lavelle and Crepare, who like most of his games are just about a singular idea, and they kind of like explore that in a relatively short form. I think that's one thing, is that I'm not making a short form game. I'm making a game that I want to sell, that I want to be able to sell on itch.io and Steam, and hopefully make enough off the proceeds from that I can sort of establish myself, long term, and raise my profile and get some more patronage that way and stuff like that. So I have this plan that diverges from some of the artists who I think probably personally inspire me the most, and it means I'm making, in some ways, a more conventional kind of game. So anyway, in that context, I have like multiple ideas, I think, sitting within this game. I don't think they're contradictory, and I don't think the total scope of those ideas adds up to something that's unmanageable. Like, oh, this is way more, in game development, if you do it for long enough, you kind of develop this sense for scoping, like knowing how big an idea is, how much work it's going to be to actually make it real and follow it through all the way and make it really worth the trouble. And thus far, it's not really setting off my scoping alarm, my like, oh God, you're making something 10 times too big and ambitious. I'm sure I'll have some surprises later in the project, and hopefully at that point you can kind of realize you'll have enough creative constraints and you'll understand the creative space of the project well enough that you can say, okay, you know what, I can cut A, B, and C and still have the rest of the alphabet, and everything is still, and still have a really strong piece. So like when I was thinking about like, oh, the game is still missing something, it did kind of freak me out a little bit, because I was like, gee, am I trying to convince myself to add another idea to the game? And that may still be the case, but I don't think it is in this case, because I think what I'm in search of is more like one of those filtering ideas, something that helps connect and fill in other things rather than bolting a whole new sidecar onto the game, or just sprinkling a whole bunch more work, that's just going to like plague me for the rest of my days. And yeah, like, so, and the other thing that I think one of the things that I'm feeling about this piece of the puzzle that's still missing is that it needs to come from a direction, from a part of my brain that is not quite so analytical and deductive, because it's fine and well when you're getting a game off the ground and you're just trying to like make a basic mechanic work or whatever, to say, well, A then B then C, if I want to have a game that's about indirect manipulation and avoidance of threats and stuff like that, like I have in this game that I'm doing, then well, I should make an object interaction system, and I did that. But there's a bunch of other things that are kind of what end up giving a game its soul and its personality that that don't necessarily come from that super rational place. You know, you kind of have to take a trip into the parts of your brain that don't make as much sense, you know. One creator that I've always really respected, just in general, for many reasons, but who I think has always been able to do this really well, is Brendan Chung of Blendo Games. Because, you know, you look at his games, and there's a bunch of things that don't make, like, perfect analytical sense, but they certainly make sense in the context of the overall creative. You know, they have a great deal of integrity within the creative work. And they also they help, you know, like, he's a guy who basically, like, as long as he's been making work, he's had a voice. And I think I do have a creative voice, but I didn't, you know, the whole first, like, 10, 15 years of my career, I wasn't really getting to develop my own voice. I was contributing to a larger project. And I think I was developing that voice in the background, you know, with my spare time projects and things like that. But, you know, I think part of finding that my voice in this situation is digging into what's interesting to me personally and some of the things about me as a human being. It's a little weird to speak of that in generalities, and maybe hopefully someday you'll see what I mean by that. Anyway, I need something kind of weird and unique, you know, that isn't in every other game, that is going to lend this game, you know, some personality and soul. Because I think there are places in the game for that to really live. I hope I'm just not making, like, something that's just the sum of its influences or parts. But it's really tricky to realize that you need that. You know, it's kind of terrifying, because if I decided that I needed a mechanic that would make other elements in the game X and Y work, then I would be able to kind of arrive at that rationally. Whereas when you say, I need something that's just a bolt from the blue, you're kind of in the predicament of having to bottle lightning. And what do you do there? You know, you go out into a field with a kite and a jar, and you're like, all right, I hope maybe some lightning will strike me, and then I can bottle it. It's like, you can't force that stuff, you know? And a lot of the most interesting things that have ended up in games have been those sort of, like, random bits of inspiration. I mean, that said, I'm not thinking about this kind of stuff in, like, totally unconstructive, I'll just go and, like, dream for a while and just sort of find my muse, you know? I mean, if it's not clear, like, I think my brain does think in pretty concrete, like, you know, ways. So I don't think I'm signing myself up for a bunch of feckless dreaming. But it is, you know, it's an interesting challenge. So what I've done, what I've decided to do about this, something that, you know, I'm just one person, and there's a whole bunch of things in my head about this game, but there's also a bunch of things that other people could probably see about what's in my head if I gave them a peek. So what I'm doing is I'm writing up a big email sort of context dump, I call it, that will hopefully give various, like, trusted game developer people and just other people whose creative input in my life I value a lot. And I'm going to send it to them, and hopefully that context dump will give them a clear enough idea of what's in my head that when I pose these questions to them that I've been posing to myself, they'll have some insight that will help me kind of, you know, unlock what I'm seeking in my mind. So yeah, I'm about to send that out, and we'll see. And I have no idea. I'm hoping that within the next few days or within the next week, I will be in a very different spot, and I'll have kind of the last major piece of the puzzle with which that will sort of get me going on a bunch of other stuff. In the meantime, I'm sure I'll have a bunch of other, you know, I've been doing code and feature stuff here and there. But, you know, I don't want to put off this kind of, like, high-level stuff too long, because you can really find yourself at sea if you haven't. So I think that's about all that I want to talk about. Let me check my notes here and see if there's any other stuff. No, yeah, I think that's about it. So yeah, that is what I've been up to, and thank you very much for watching this sort of strange, high-level, rambly piece about creative process and stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. And thank you, as always, to folks who are providing me with support through Patreon, and with your creative input and your intellectual input and your moral support and your money. because all of those things are really what keep me going. I definitely would not have gotten this far if it was just me in a shack all by myself somewhere. So I really appreciate that, and I hope you'll join me next time, and who knows where we'll be. Someplace interesting, I hope. So thanks a lot, and have a lovely day.